afternoon, Rob. Hi, Helen. Lovely to see you both again. As you both know, I'm Linda, Director of Executive Search at Prospectus, appointing directors and chief executives into purpose-driven organisations and charities. What I've been increasingly interested in is looking at transferability of skills. So I know that you two have some fantastic insights to share on that from experience both in the corporate sector and in the charitable sector. We're delighted to welcome Helen Marshall, Chief Executive of Brook, the UK's leading provider of sexual health and wellbeing support. And Helen formerly had a career in commercial insurance before her first move into the charitable sector. And Robert Cade from Capgemini. He started out his career at Capgemini before moving to the charity Centrepoint as Director of Strategy and Performance, and then most recently has returned as Public Sector Director at Capgemini. So lots of interesting experiences to draw on. I'm going to kick off by asking you both, perhaps we'll start with Helen, a little bit about any preconceptions you had about the charity sector when you were working in the corporate space, and I guess which of those turned out to be true or false.
I think I started working in the corporate sector when I was 18, so it was my absolutely first job, really. And I worked at the insurance company for 11 years and became its first female and its youngest director at that point. I also taught English literacy as basic skills and set up traveller education across Essex in my spare time, and managed a team of 30 tutors for a college in the South End. And it was through that work that I became more familiar with actually working directly with service users and seeing the difference that actually education made to the lives of those people. And I became increasingly less interested, I suppose, in insurance products and selling professional indemnity insurance and promoting that and developing new products. So there was complete astonishment when I said that I was leaving and that I wanted a job that I found more fulfilling. Complete astonishment and an absolute confidence that I would clearly realise I'd made a mistake and would want to return to the corporate sector, so much so that my organisation offered to keep my job open for me for a year because they were so confident that I would realise and would return to them. However, that didn't happen. So the preconceptions really about the charitable sector were, one, it had no money, that it somehow wasn't as professional as the corporate sector, and thirdly, that staff didn't work as hard, and that it was all very laid back and didn't quite have the performance edge that the commercial sector sees itself as having. So they were probably the preconceptions that I came across. I don't know, Rob, whether any of those were shared by you.
Oh, 100%. So they all very much mirror some of the preconceived thoughts about the charity sector, and indeed what people still think, I think, in a lot of areas. Yeah, and it's interesting for me because my first role after university was actually in the not-for-profit sector, and I decided after a year that I needed to get some skills, and therefore I moved into the corporate sector, moved into Capgemini. My idea was I'd go there for a couple of years to build my skill set before returning to the not-for-profit sector, and 11 years later, I finally took the dive when I was offered the great role of strategy and performance director at Centrepoint. And it was quite interesting what you touched on there about the view of amateur charity sector. So I think that still portrays in some parts of society, but certainly the difference I saw from those 11 years was a huge professionalization of the services. And I think that's largely down to the fact that due to austerity and other reasons, charities have actually had to take on the mantle of providing an awful lot of public services which are critical to the needs of people across this country. And therefore, the professionalism, the hard-working nature of people who work for the charities is there. The one thing that certainly hasn't changed for me now in terms of my view during that time was the admiration for people who work for the charity sector. I think the passion and commitment to make a difference was certainly a view which I had before going into the corporate sector, and one which retained when I went back into the charity sector as well. So yeah, absolutely echo your views there.
I think it's interesting what you've said about the staff, and I actually found, of course, the passion for the work that charities do, but that also staff within the charitable sector are actually quite often flexible around how they deliver that. And what sits behind it is an absolute drive for better outcomes for people and to making changes that improves people's lives in a way that I think probably doesn't exist within the commercial sector. I do think it's true that charities often struggle to raise income, particularly for core services and staff, and specifically for smaller charities as well. So therefore, finances are often at the forefront for a charity in a way that they probably don't impact the majority of staff working within the commercial sector, because they are less aware of the financial environment in which their organisation operates. I know there has been debate about salaries within the charitable sector and the pay and benefits that sit alongside that. I mean, certainly when I left, my salary reduced by 60%. I sold my house, I lost my company car, I lost my clothes allowance. I no longer had access to, unbelievably, a private butler, private dining rooms and a wine cellar. So very, very different kinds of environment. And for me personally, there was a huge shift around getting used to a new culture. So a huge readjustment. And that very definitely, I think, took some getting used to.
Thanks, Helen. And thinking, love to hear more about the wine cellar. But I wonder if it still exists. I'm sure it does. What do you think have been some of the most useful or even less useful parts of your experience, both of you, from your time in the corporate sector, that enabled you to succeed so well in your role in the charity? What really helped? What were the skills that you brought forward to really help with that? Rob.
Yeah, cool. So, I mean, actually touching on one of the things which Helen's just said, one of the things which certainly needed to adjust in terms of skill set was previously I'd relied heavily on support functions. So therefore actually realizing that you cannot, due to restricted funding nature of some charities, have the same support as you would do for HR. So you had to take on a lot of the leadership yourself of those elements. And I think my role in consulting prior to that had enabled me to pick up those skills to transfer them across to the charity sector. Now, I think in general, all of the work which I did across different sectors brought a whole range of skills and techniques, and those could be applied within the charity sector to deliver the outcome results. I learned an awful lot by going back into the charity sector as well, from other people who had different experiences. But I think the fact that I'd worked across so many different organisations as a consultant, I could see what works quite well, what works differently. And let's face it, the world of the charity sector is quite complex, and what you're dealing with differs from day to day. So to have that arsenal of knowledge and experiences to bring to bear to different situations, I think was quite useful. And combine that with the knowledge of people who'd worked in the sector for years and years, that's quite a powerful combination to bring to bear. So I think it's bringing that experience, bringing that knowledge and bringing that skills together. And that was the same for yourself, Helen.
I think for me, my commercial background absolutely shaped my view that charities are businesses that have social objectives. So I came into the charitable sector with a very clear, these are still businesses. And I think what I brought with me were things around financial management, business planning, strategy, actually how you report to and also manage a board of directors. And I think something that my corporate organisation did very well was actually investing and rewarding its staff outside of perhaps formal systems. So the kind of saying thank you, acknowledging where somebody has worked over and above. And my organisation in the corporate sector did that very well, which meant that I recognised the value and the importance of doing that for staff. I think the other thing, one of the things that was really useful was the kind of, as I call it, the more professional approach. So that kind of how you externally present, you know, as a united team, when you're meeting external clients, you know, that your documents are consistent and that they're high quality, that you use data to be able to evidence and back up your arguments, and that you actually respect other skills when you are working as part of a team. And I think for me, that approach was probably formed whilst I was working in the corporate sector, and therefore that's what I carried on and brought with me. And I think has been really useful in shaping how I have operated since.
And I certainly hear more and more, you know, organizations describing themselves as businesses with a social purpose. And I think that's something we are certainly seeing. On I suppose the flip side of that, Rob, what have been the reflections, you know, moving out of Centrepoint, you know, to your new role at Capgemini, that you know, has enabled you to succeed back in the corporate world, do you think?
Yeah, I think I changed quite a lot during the course of my time away from Capgemini, and I think people have seen a different Rob return in his leadership position than what I left Capgemini in. I think part of that is really the reaffirmation about the importance of people and the importance of what life happens outside of the workplace environments. And I think working on the front line for a charity, you do understand much more what goes on in people's lives, both inside a charity and outside a charity, and understand that it's how people work together in that environment that delivers the outcomes for people. So much greater impact and I guess acknowledgement for myself in terms of the teams, in terms of the work that clients have to do and what goes on in their life outside. I lose track probably of the amount of times when I was at Centrepoint when somebody would approach me from a corporate background with a great idea and then actually realise how far away from meeting the outcomes that idea actually was. And I think therefore when I work with clients, I'm much more aware of what their day-to-day work entails, what their outcomes are that they need to achieve, that actually by suggesting something 180 degrees different to what they need to do actually takes up some of their valuable time rather than actually focusing on the outcomes. So that was quite interesting. Very much a real understanding that it's the people that make the business and understanding what their needs are on a day-to-day basis. I think that the biggest thing for me is a sense of perspective. So I care passionately about the outcomes that Capgemini delivers for society. But having said that, it will never be as much as trying to help a young person to stay alive on the streets or to support a key worker who has to go into services during the height of COVID on a day-to-day basis. Those are big challenges. So I think I've got a sense of perspective now as I go day by day that some of the things that before I would have seen as being absolutely disastrous perhaps are not as disastrous as I thought they were at the time. So sense of calmness, I think, now compared to where I was previously, and I'm probably therefore more effective in my role because I can stay with a clearer sight of what needs to achieve. For me, those two things I think are really important around acknowledging the role of people and what goes on in their day-to-day life and understanding that things happen in life and also a sense of perspective about what's important and maybe what's not important as well.
That's amazing to hear. And, you know, I would love for more corporates to be thinking about, you know, the benefits of their senior leaders taking time out in a charity to, you know, increase their perspective. Yeah, really, really helpful. And what advice would either of you give to someone, you know, currently working in the corporate space, looking to transfer their experience into a charity?
I think I'd say actually gain some experience. You know, become a trustee, volunteer, do some fundraising, get involved if your organisation has a CSR function and projects. So actually get involved, meet the charities, meet people that work in charities, and see whether you feel that that is a fit for you. I also think it's about mapping your skills and looking and being very clear about your expectations. So what is it that you want out of your next career move, and whether that's into the charitable sector. And again, I think people work best when they're passionate about the work of their organisation. So it's not just I'd like to work for charity and help people. It's actually, what are the very specific things that get me excited or get me angry? And what are the causes that I'm perhaps already championing in my personal life that are a good fit for me? And perhaps explore those areas first. I also think it's about, I think the charitable sector often works slightly more flexibly. So actually take that into account and be aware that you'll have a lot to learn.
Rob?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm going to be at risk of repeating everything that Helen's just said, because I think she's put it really well there. I think I have quite a few people who speak to me, having seen the journey that I've taken, and I think the desire to work for organisations which make a difference is bigger now than what it's ever been. So people really want to make that journey. But my large feeling looking across the board is that people don't necessarily understand the sector which they're going into at the initial stage, and so therefore don't understand the breadth of different work which is undertaken within the charity sector and how it differs hugely from one charity to another charity. And so mirroring what Helen says, to actually take that time to understand the sector, and again, through volunteering, through taking on a trusteeship, will help understand the alignment of where your passion and your skills fit to where you want to go to. I think that's quite important, because a lot of people just say, I want to go into the charity sector, but which part of the charity sector, what is the work that you want to do, is huge otherwise, and you could get lost if you don't understand what it is that you want to do within the sector. Without being negative as well, and picking up on something that Helen said, I think it's expectations and managing expectations around that. Quite a few people talk to me about financial package, and certainly the charity sector has got a lot better in recent years, but my argument is you should never be fully comparing your financial income to your corporate sector, because it rightly should not be competing with those roles, because you get something else from working in the charity sector, which is the ability to give back to society as well. So be realistic about what it means for your life choices and whereabouts you should be aiming to achieve, and see if that does work for yourself. I think similar to Helen, I took a slight financial dip to go into the charity sector, but I was more than happy to do that due to the other benefits and the great privilege of working for Centrepoint that entailed. And I think also be realistic about work-life balance. I loved what Helen said earlier about how hardworking some of the people were in the sector. I've heard from a number of people saying that they want to take a step back, so thinking about the charity sector. I'd probably, from my experience, argue that actually it's not taking a step back, it's taking a different route on your career journey, because certainly some of the hardest working people that I know are in the charity sector as well. So I think having a sense of expectation management, and also more positively, having a look at all the great opportunities and different charities which are in the sector, and understanding what kind of calls really resonates with yourself, where do your skill sets really fit within the mix of the work which is ongoing.
Thanks, Rob. I always think the pay piece is always an interesting one. And certainly, yes, there is an awful lot of reward that you get from working at a charity, but the pay does need to be there too. They're really helpful advice, and I'm always pleased to see, individuals looking to transfer their experience. But the more that they have understood about the sector, even if they haven't experienced it, through a trustee role, through some volunteering, so that they're coming with their eyes wide open, if not direct experience, is really, really helpful. So thanks for that. And then again, you know, I also work with a lot of clients and put individuals in front of them that have got a corporate experience. You know, some clients are more open to that than others. What advice would you give to a hiring manager deciding whether to consider someone purely from a corporate background for a role, a hiring manager or a board?
Should I take that one first? I think that I think it's a great opportunity. Why would anybody try to limit the pool of people you're looking at from just those people who work in your current surroundings? I think the opportunity to bring people in with different sets of perspectives, with knowledge and a skill set which will meet the skills required to undertake the job, but perhaps a fresh pair of eyes and understanding of how it works in other sectors is quite compelling for me. Do understand that the individual might not necessarily understand the sector as much as people who come directly from within the sector. But I think that can be outweighed in some respects by the skills which people bring in. My other argument would probably be to not see that everybody who comes from the corporate sector is exactly the same. People are so different in every task of life. I took a simple decision 20 years ago to go into the corporate sector, but I could quite simply have stayed within the not-for-profit sector. It doesn't mean that my motives and my passion were any different during that space of time. So take some time to understand the individuals and understand what their motives and what their passions are. And you probably find that there's lots of people who are very passionate but have taken a different career journey to date. So I don't think there's much to be lost myself, to be honest with you, by opening the pool a little bit larger in terms of people who can fit the roles within organisations.
What do you think, Helen?
I agree with Rob. I think, why wouldn't you want a staff team that has diverse experiences, which includes their working background and the skills that they're able to bring? I think it's really important when you're recruiting to focus on things like behaviour and cultural fit, as well as actual skills. And I think if someone's coming from the corporate sector, you can clearly test things around knowledge and interest. You know, are they aware of what's in the news that might impact the sector? You know, have they heard of any policy developments? You know, what are their own personal drivers? There are absolutely other ways of testing someone's commitment to your work without purely looking at the job that they happen to be doing and using that job to therefore then define how you think that they will fit with your organisation. I think something that's really important, perhaps for somebody moving into a more senior leadership role, is that they can then be offered a mentor, so that they actually have someone that they maybe feel can help guide and support them, and also someone where they can ask the questions that perhaps they don't want to ask of their new colleagues and their new team.
Yeah, I think mentoring is always a good idea, or buddying. Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. And encouraging you know, words of encouragement and support to individuals looking to change sector and to those looking to recruit. The only piece I would add, I guess, is thinking a bit about language. I think sometimes when I'm looking at some CVs from certain individuals, sometimes just thinking about, you know, making sure that your language is as accessible and transferable as possible. I might not know all the acronyms in financial services, you know, would be my request. Thank you so much, Helen, Rob. We're really looking forward to sharing this with our networks, and yeah, I think encouraging more transferability in the sector. Thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you, Linda, for inviting us.
Thank you.